Directed by Craig Zindi and Mark Zammit. We are talking Witch. And this is a 2024 kind of fantasy horror movie. Well, you probably guessed, kind of about witches, but kind of not at the same time. So this is a low-budget British movie, and it's a very slow-moving film, and is quite ambitious in some ways. So the story takes place in the 16th century, and I guess we primarily focus on this woman called Twyla, who is wife to a blacksmith. And in the town that they live in, there is a horrific murder where a young woman kills her parents and decapitates them. And she is being somewhat strange and therefore is accused of being a witch. But she implicates Twyla as somehow being involved. And this being the 16th century, people are quick to jump to conclusions. So they kind of end up getting wrapped up in it. And there's a strange old man that seems to kind of know a little bit about what's going on. And this could even involve different timelines, the multiverse, and things like that. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what I think works in this movie. So this is a low budget movie, and as such we have to factor in the budgetary restraints. But I will say, I think the production design here is very strong for what is obviously a low budget movie. Now, I have seen some critiques saying, oh, it's not historically accurate. You know, we're watching a low budget kind of B-movie horror here. I don't think it's really fair to call out that all of that really and hold it too much against it on a kind of a movie like this, to be honest. But it's worth mentioning. So there you go. But what we do have is a quite gothic and atmospheric, moody movie that takes place in this kind of time period, with lots of kind of different kind of buildings and architecture and people running around in sort of costumes and things like this, and their attitudes towards obviously what they don't understand, etc. You know, we're introduced to a few sort of characters. The Twyla herself, her husband, the blacksmith, the kind of the town sheriff, this kind of religious leader of the town, all of who I think are kind of quite well realised. And just a general look at the film, I've got to say, for a low budget movie, it's actually kind of quite polished. There's not loads of kind of VFX and stuff, but we do have a degree, and I think it's done to a good standard. Now, I actually think people are probably thinking this is a higher budget movie than it actually is, because I think it's presented very well. But it is a lower budget movie, and obviously there are restrictions in that, and there are times where that is apparent. There's a little bit of obvious green screen here and there, but generally speaking, I think the actual presentation, just the general kind of like the costuming, the kind of the hair, the makeup, the set design, all of that is actually very, very impressive. And I think as well the movie has this kind of deliberately slow pace. Now, obviously you've had The Witch that came out some years ago with Anna Taylor-Joy, and this is, I guess, trying to sort of have a companion piece to a large degree, but this one introduces some quite ambitious ideas that involves, without kind of giving away too much here, parallel universes, the multiverse, the different kind of timelines and things like this, which is obviously quite ambitious in regards to a story like this, incorporating it into this 16th century kind of witch tale. There are some pretty kind of decent scenes. Obviously, the one that they tend to use for the cover is this the girl holding the beheaded heads of her parents. Pretty striking imagery here, and there's some really nice like cinematography, using kind of like, you know, dry ice and kind of fog to make it kind of look very sort of spooky and stuff like that. So visually speaking, I think this movie is very strong. And I have to say, I think the performances, outside of a few instances where kind of modern sort of language is used and things like that. But I gotta say, I think the performances are fine. The girl who plays Twyla, I've seen in quite a few Scott Jeffrey movies. But I gotta say, I think everyone here did a good job. There's a couple of standouts for me. This kind of religious leader of this town, I think, did a really kind of good job of, you feel he's whipping up these people into a kind of a frenzy and things like this. So yeah, I mean, as a story-wise, it's a slow-moving movie, which is ambitious. I don't think it fully works, which transitions into what doesn't work now. And I have to say, I think the story here is maybe the main problem that I have with the film. It's not that it's necessarily a bad story, but I think its pacing is maybe a little bit too slow. And I have to say, I mean, really, anything involving multiverses, different timelines, has the danger of being somewhat convoluted. And I think this is true of this movie, because I do feel when we get to this point, it ends up being a little bit of a convoluted mess, to be honest. As are many stories that kind of have this. There's things that you feel don't kind of quite make sense, and it ends up being a little bit sort of overwrought for its own good. And I think some people may be disappointed for the lack of any real set pieces outside of the initial murder that kind of happens at the beginning. So normally you would expect to have some kind of payoff moment, and it doesn't really have that. I think the movie's best and most memorable and chilling scene is relatively early on, and as the movie goes on, it doesn't really ever recapture that kind of that kind of moment. It ends up being a little muddled and ultimately a little dull, and I think you feel the characters are kind of running around after themselves. In actual fact, this is one of those movies where you have a scene at the beginning that ends up being towards at the end of the movie, and then it kind of backtracks and kind of shows you it again. So you feel this movie is somewhat sort of treading water at places. As I've mentioned, and there have been people that have complained that this movie isn't historically accurate. I personally feel it's, when you're watching a movie, especially a low budget genre movie, you want a slice of cake rather than a slice of life. So I'm a little forgiving with that kind of thing. But there are one or two occasions, as I say, you notice a little bit of green screen, and there are a few budgetary restraints here that you feel sometimes you can kind of see. But I'd say, on most part, visually speaking, I think this is a very strong film. Yeah, overall though, it ends up being not a particularly interesting film. Very, very good to look at, and certainly not a bad story, but I just don't think it really sort of excels or ends up being particularly interesting, and ultimately, in actual fact, a little bit confusing. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to you next time. Bye for now.